Okay, I'm Scott Kowalty from the Department of English Language and Literature. I have spent the last 4 Monday afternoons between 3 and 4 discussing Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work with a discussion group led very ably, I must say, by Gary Goody. And I'm quite pleased this afternoon to introduce Professor Csikszentmihalyi. Also, I should remind you that we have a book signing and a reception right after the talk upstairs in the foyer of the balcony. And food will be provided as well, which is amazing and unusual. I think that's a good thing to do. And for the question and answer period, we would like you to use the microphones. There are 2 downstairs in front and 2 upstairs in the balcony, in the front of the balcony as well. This is not only so people can hear, but because this is all being televised and recorded. And if you don't find a microphone, your question won't get onto the tape. So there's more than just an oral reason for that. And I also want to thank the 5 undergraduate colleges at UNI and as well as the Rod Library for cooperating to sponsor the Changing Faces of Iowa series with its focus on human creativity. This event is part of that series, for those of you who don't know. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is Emeritus Professor of Human Development at the University of Chicago, where he chaired the Department of Psychology. He now holds a Davidson Professor of Psychology at Claremont Graduate University. He's the author of some 15 books and numerous articles that have created and elucidated positive psychology, also known as the psychology of optimal experience, or in one word, flow, F-L-O-W. It's the one 4-letter F word we can say out loud without worrying about an FCC fine. In fact, I would call Professor Csikszentmihalyi the father of flow, the notion that happiness doesn't derive from endorphins, or delirium, or being totally in love with yourself or your lover, but instead comes from productive, absorbing, challenging work. From my own perspective, there's only one word for this concept: liberating. It offers profound and genuine justification for living a creative life, not just because it's fun, which seems rather trivial, or because it's productive, which seems a recipe for workaholism, but because it's just plain true. Our best moments come when we're doing our best work and cycling in and out of work with play, with what Brenda Ullin calls moodling. We're not slackers, we're not lazy, we're being creative when we daydream, when we take long walks to solve problems, when we make connections that seem to make no sense. The sense comes later, when everyone else sees it, or maybe not. But either way, it was worth doing. I'm speaking now as a writer and researcher of invention strategies for writers. His flow concepts arrived several years ago like a great gift to the whole tribe of writers and writing teachers. After the first, "Why didn't I think of that?" reaction, I could only feel grateful that he not only thought of it, he provided convincing evidence from field research of its accuracy and relevance to all creative souls. Plus, for readers who have no special expertise in psychology, he's a damn good writer. So, speaking today on flow and the quality of life, help me welcome Professor Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you all for coming on a Friday afternoon to hear about something which I hope you feel is as important as Scott mentioned, and I believe, which is how to make your life more rich and enjoyable and meaningful. Yes, well, I was told when I started my speaking career out of graduate school that one should start a lecture with some simple question that would get people involved on a easy way with what comes later. So let me start with my easy question, which I hope to unpack as we go on. And that question is, what is life? Now that question obviously would have very different answers depending on whether you ask it from a chemist or a biologist or a theologian. As a psychologist, I propose to answer the question of what is life with a very simple definition, which is that life really is the content of what a person experiences from birth to death. In other words, what we consider our life is all the feelings, perceptions, thoughts, emotions that we have been conscious of from throughout the 70, 90, whatever years of our life. So I'm not concerned about life in terms of what happens to the body, but rather what takes place in the mind. And once you start thinking about experience as being the content of what our life is, you realize some general problems that underline our ability to really live well. One is that the amount of experience that can register in consciousness, the kind of things we can become aware of, is really very limited. As William James, the first great American psychologist, said over 100 years ago, there are millions of things clamoring for our attention around us, and we can only see very few of them. We can only register very few of them. This is a more recent way of thinking about the limits of attention, of what we can actually experience at any given time. And while I would ask you not to take the numbers too seriously, because nobody has actually counted how many bits a person can process during a lifetime, a good ballpark figure is that you can register about 114, 110, 120 at the most bits of information per second. In other words, you can become aware of 120 distinct impressions, if you want to call them, during per second at the most. And this may seem to you like a lot, but actually, for instance, for somebody to understand a speaker in their native language, it takes about 60 bits of information to decode the sounds that you hear into words and then connect the words to memories that will give meaning to those words. So essentially, you can, if 60 bits are needed for understanding one person, 60 bits a second, it means, of course, that you can't really understand two people speaking to you at the same time. And that's a huge obstacle to experience, for instance. I mean, there are 8 billion people in the world at this point, more or less, and we can only hear one of them at a time and understand what they say. So this limit on attention has to include everything that passes through your experience. That means what you feel. For instance, you have to register that you're hungry, that you want to do something in 15 minutes, you have some appointment to do. All of these kind of memories or expectations, as well as feelings and sensations, all come out from this very limited bottleneck of information that we need to pass experiences through if we want to have them. Otherwise, they don't exist as far as we are concerned. So when you look over time at what happens to us in a lifetime, you see that you could multiply 114 per second per 18 hours of being, or 16 hours of waking time, 70 years of lifetime, let's say, you have 168 billion items or bits of information that could constitute what your life is. And it looks, again, like a huge amount of live through in a life, but it's not really that much, because you begin to think that when you start counting where these moments of experience come from, you see that every day we have to process about 150,000 bits per day in something which is required for us by the kind of survival pressures we have, like working, or if you're young, studying. So that's about roughly 1/3 of all the information comes from things that we have to do and we have often very little choice about. Then there is another roughly 1/3 which which has to be devoted to processing information that has to do with maintenance, like dressing, eating, cleaning, traveling, all the other things that need to be done in order, shopping and so forth. Just to go by, just to restore things to order and so that you have a decent, more or less decent life. And then that leaves then, at least in our culture nowadays, about 1/3 of the time during which we can experience things and process information, it's free time. And that is not committed, and we can choose to use it as we wish. The ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle used to believe, or say they believe, that humans can be truly human only during leisure, only during this time where there is no pressure to do something in order to survive or to keep things going along. But they thought of leisure, in fact, as not a time to have fun or to relax, but as a time for growth, for learning. In fact, the term for leisure in Greek used to be skolia, which was the root from which our word school comes from. In other words, the Greek thinkers thought that free time was essentially equivalent to going to school. That is, because that was a freely chosen activity done in order to perfect one's skills, to enlarge one's mind, and that's what free time was for. Now, in these three divisions, by the way, of time use or attentional processing are very general, are very universal. You find them even in primates, in baboons, chimpanzees living in the tropics and so forth. They spend about the same amount of time doing these things. And in preliterate societies, you find generally, actually in some societies, even very simple societies, the proportions are a little different. You work less and you spend more free time. But essentially, they vary. They stay the same. In the last few hundred years, we have seen huge swings in the proportions of these three activities. For instance, during the Industrial Revolution, at the end of the 18th century, people worked almost twice as long under pretty bad conditions, and they had very little free time to do anything with. We have a lot of free time compared to most periods of history, but we don't generally use it the way Aristotle thought we should for perfecting our physical and mental abilities. It's mostly watching television.